Something very toxic has been spreading around the United States over the past 18 months. And no, I'm not talking about COVID. Asian hate crime has skyrocketed throughout America. Everywhere from New York City to Los Angeles, and even in Canada, a country known for its diversity, saw a 717% increase in anti-Asian crime in the city of Vancouver. However, things are changing and citizens are fighting back. In today's episode of Real Talk China, I'm going to introduce you to a Chinese New Yorker who is working hand in hand with the New York City Police Department to build awareness and self-protection programs. New York City is putting an end to Asian hate crime, and it's time to tell that story. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 9 of Real Talk China. All right, everybody, I'd like to welcome into the studio and in the next episode of Real Talk China. This is Fred Teng. I'm really excited to welcome you to Real Talk China because you have a very important cause that you're working on in New York City. We're talking specifically in today's episode about the rise of anti-Asian hate crime, and I really like the work that you are doing in New York. So as we start this episode off, I'd like you to give everybody a little intro to yourself.
Sure. My name is Fred Teng. I was born in Shanghai, China. And when I was 5 years old, my family moved to Hong Kong, which was a British colony at that time. Mm-hmm. And I came to the States at 15, first in Los Angeles and then New York. In the last 3 decades, I have had different careers. In the 1980s, I was in the financial industry with Merrill Lynch and Oppenheimer and Company. In the 1990s, I was with AT&T in the telecommunications industry. In between, I ran for city council. And then since the 2000s and on, I've been in all sorts of media-related companies. And about 5 years ago, I wanted to devote some of my time to improve U.S.-China relations. Much like, Cyrus, like yourself, we try to make these two countries better understand each other. We cannot change each other, but we need to understand each other from where we're coming from, and hopefully everyone can benefit.
Absolutely. Well, Fred, your story really, resonated with me because that is one of the big goals that I have on my channel. As we see the rise in anti-Asian hate crime, there's something that we need to remember is that we have millions upon millions of Asian Americans like yourself who are a very valuable part of American society and who are contributing tremendously to the great nation of America. I want everybody to know a little bit more about, what's happening on the ground in New York City. And my first question for you is, what do you think is the main catalyst for this explosion in Asian hate crime that we've seen in America and most specifically in your neighborhood in New York City?
Sure. First of all, let me point out, we can continue to use anti-Asian hate crime as our conversation because the terminology people understand. But I want to point out is this wave of the hate crime is really aiming against China and Chinese people in the United States. None of the perpetrator, I think, will go say, I'm going to beat up a Japanese today. I want to kill a Korean today. I want to punch a Filipino or a Vietnamese or Indian today. Their goal is to have violence against Chinese with their vicinity. Now, some people get hurt. If they're Korean and these people mistaking them, they do. But unless we get to the bottom of this, the understanding this wave is a xenophobia, it's an anti-China, anti-Chinese wave, we're not going to solve this problem because we went to the umbrella terminology. But we can still talk about using this term. I understand that's a term more universally used.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you brought up a really good point there, Fred, is because, I think media always does say it is a Asian hate crime, but I think, some statistics show, for example, I think one of the stats that I saw was 40% of crimes are specifically towards the Chinese community. Could be a lot more than that, but certainly, what we've seen in the media, and how things have changed so severely, specifically over the last 2 years, I would say. We know that, China right now is constantly, it's a very hot topic issue. It's in the newspaper every single day, the country of China. We see many corporations in the United States, almost every major corporation that's, listed in the Dow Jones, for example, they're doing business in China. They're opening factories in China. They're marketing to China. Remains a very valuable marketplace for American companies. And we see a tremendous amount of Chinese company listed on the New York Stock Exchange as well. So, our countries are so, interweaved together. It really just makes sense to have a better relationship. Tell us a little bit more about your opinion about this, what we've seen over the last 24 months, specifically in the media about China.
You're exactly right. Why didn't we have this kind of violence against Chinese maybe 5 years ago, 8 years ago? And I do think that this wave of violence is incited by extreme politicians and also perpetuated by the media. I think that, a lot of the things we can still debate. There's a whole history of anti-Chinese sentiments since the 1871, but we can discuss that some other time and can show you list by list of why at certain stage. And interestingly is that a lot of the anti-Chinese actions is done by the U.S. government, not by people. So right now it is really hate speeches that's being created that perpetuate the violence. And unfortunately, hate speeches are protected in the United States. Do you know that if somebody draw a swastika and you can just spray it with water and it goes away, it's not a hate crime? But if you carve it into the window, that becomes a hate crime. These are things I'm learning these days. It's really, we have crazy laws. But my point is, we want to avoid this from happening. I don't want to be on a review panel to review a case of somebody already heard to determine that this is a hate crime or not. We should not have these crime at all. We should not have people aiming at people because of their ethnicity, their race, their origin at all.
Correct. Well, I think you've hit a good point there on the head. And for example, we have seen some United States senators, have come out and they have said, we need to ban all Chinese international students. They are members of the Communist Party. They are spies from China's military. One of the senators that comes to mind is Tom Cotton, who just has really come out with some very, very hardcore statements that are just really to the extreme. That I to be honest, I just don't see a rational human being thinking like this. And I'm not afraid to call a spade a spade. When you're going down to that extreme level where you're saying we should ban all Chinese students from America, you're really going to the extreme. And when, of course, as a politician, as we know, leadership comes from the top. When we're seeing government officials, these are elected people by the government that are representing the people, coming out with statements like that, it makes sense how we're now seeing a rise in anti-China hate crime, anti-Chinese.
After September 11, we also shut down the country. Most international students cannot come to the United States.
Right.
As a result, our university get hurt tremendously.
Absolutely.
The latest, I know, in 2019, the U.S. issued 350,000 student visa. That it's equal to $17.5 billion a year for our educational institution, because they're not getting, scholarships or anything. So they bring cash to support our educational institution, so these institutions can better serve all of the students in the United States. And by limiting them, and right now, because of the rhetoric, even if some of the students get accepted, they rather go to Europe, they rather go to Australia, rather come to the United States, because they feel it's unsafe.
Absolutely. Well, I think that, interesting enough, as you know, I'm based in Vancouver, Canada at the moment, and this is something that we've seen a tremendous increase in Chinese international students to Canada. And this is one of the things that I had mentioned. I think you're going to see countries like the UK and Canada, for example, that are being perceived as a safer space to be.
Right.
And I think this is not only are you're going to see more Chinese families try to choose these safer destinations, but you're probably going to see more Asian families choose this. For example, if you're Japanese or Korean,
Right.
if you're a parent, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, we know that, unfortunately, sometimes this anti-China sentiment can turn into an anti-Asian sentiment,
Right.
and for the average American, you're not going to be able to determine, who's from Korea, who's from Japan, who's from
Right.
China. And so I think you're going to see, as a whole, this is potentially very weakening to America's economy, America's entire educational system. We need international students because they bring valuable tuition dollars to our campuses that allow our campuses to continue to grow, to have new funding, new programs, and again, make America better. And I believe the statistic that I heard is international students account for less than 30% of all students. However, the tuition that they pay is well over half. So if we start banning international students or really start losing that, you're going to see a ripple down effect throughout every American university that ultimately depend on international student revenue to keep these universities thriving.
Right. And I would say that these students, if allowed, they would love to stay in the United States. They're not taking away jobs from Americans. They're actually creating jobs. They're actually making contribution to our country. So, it's very, very short-sighted when politicians talk like that. Ask any president of the universities. They will tell you how valuable the student exchanges are, how the school become a better school. And a lot of the school we're talking about, it's not the Harvard, Yale, and Columbia. They, of course, have limited, capacities, and they would only take certain. A lot of the students going to these universities are much needed. These universities they don't have a large endowment. It depends on tuition to support the universities.
That's right. That's right. Well, one of the classic examples that I like to use is Eric Yuan, who is the CEO and the founder of Zoom Communications.
Right.
He's originally from Shandong province.
Right.
I love his story because I believe it took him 8 times in order to apply and successfully get his visa in order to come and study. I believe he studied in California. Went on to to graduate. Obviously, founded Zoom Communications. Has become a billionaire, but employs thousands of Americans. He has founded his company inside California. I believe he's had 3 children, all of them American citizens. This is a great example of a brilliant mind from China that has contributed tremendously, to America. Obviously, he's paying a lot of tax in America, so he's, this is really a win-win for everybody involved. He's obviously a proud American, very similar to yourself, a Chinese American. And again, that is something that I want to come back to, is how valuable the Asian American and the Chinese American specifically community is to the future success of the United States of America. Let's shift gears here and let's talk specifically about New York City, because you had told me something that I found really amazing, and that is the fact that there is an Asian hate crime task force that has been established, in the New York Police Department. Tell us more about this task force.
Sure. When the hate crime started, I would say that started about, last year around April, May, after the quarantine, and after the hate speeches by our presidents and many others. Then the NYPD, because they were rappers with songs saying go down to Chinatown and kill the Asians and things like that. So the first we see like weeks with NYPD patrol cars around the blocks of Chinatown just to show a force, so making sure nobody come. And then in last August, the chief of detectives, Chief Rodney Harrison, he formed the Asian Hate Crime Task Force. And basically about 30 of the senior police officers, I think they're captain ranking and up. So they're very knowledgeable. They also have language skills. They know the culture. They know the community. They all, by that time, they all have been in the police force the 15 years, 20 years already. So they know the whole system. And they're making sure that anytime when somebody report a crime, they will accompany them. So making sure the whole process is smooth and they don't feel intimidated.
Nice.
Reporting is a hard thing because a lot of people do not report. And I've been looking at this. In fact, a lot of the hate crime people do not report, because if I get beat up because of my race, I get beat up because of my age or my gender. If I'm a woman, I get beat up, or I have a sexual orientation, I'm gay. I'm Muslim because of my religion.
Right.
people feel ashamed of themselves because I get beat up that way.
Correct.
And they don't feel, if they're not really hurt a lot, they don't want to report it. As a result, these things are all underreported. Rather than, so whereas people, if their house get robbed, everybody reports that because they can claim insurance
Right.
to get paid. But when they get beat up or someone spitting on their face, they feel ashamed. And it's not just Chinese, it's not just Asians. For everybody, they feel because I'm attacked because of who I am. It is really a sad thing to see when these things actually happen.
What was interesting as well that you told me is that the New York Police Department took it one step further, and they've also added a civilian task force. So tell us more about that.
Right. So, like I said, the police task force was formed last year. And by the way, each of these officers is above and beyond their duty. That meaning they still have their day job. They still have to do whatever assignment that they have to do, and then they still take extra time out to help the community.
Okay.
So in March of this year, we started talking about the police department. Actually, also Chief Harrison, he was thinking, hey, we should also have the input for the community. But it's not just Asian. Let's look at hate crime, because hate crime, it's not just one type of hate crime going on. It's all kind of hate crime. Well, there's anti-Asian hate crime, there's anti-Jewish hate crime, there's different type of hate crime going on.
Absolutely.
And we should have a review board. In April, we announced the formation of this group. And since then, we have monthly meetings. We met with the Manhattan DA as well as the NYPD's hate crime, the head of the hate crime task force.
Okay.
In this, I'm learning a lot about hate crime because, first of all, hate crime has to be a crime first. Then you have the hate element. And the hate element is really by state law, and it becomes more severe in terms of the punishment. But it's not so clear cut. It's not like this pile is hate crime, this pile is not hate crime. You really have to look at it. You have to look at people's mentality. You have to, some of them are mentally not very well people. And how do you deal with this situation? So I'm learning in the process of how difficult it is for law enforcement to deal with these as well.
I've got a question for you, friend. How does it work as far as when you're looking at all of these different hate crimes that are being reported? For example, what if it is a verbal insult? Would that be something that could be considered a hate crime, or does it need to have somebody physically attack you? For example, if someone obviously hits you because of your you get in a confrontation and they maybe say a racist slur and then physically hurt you. I think that one is very easy to determine. That's probably a hate crime that's punishable. Is this something that you guys are trying to work on? For example, verbal attacks, would that be considered a hate crime?
We learn a lot from this whole process, meaning, first of all, like I said before, it has to be a crime. Secondly, there is an element of bias that's involved. So I'll give you an example of about a month ago, and there was a person, he backed up his car, drove into a Hasidim Jewish family.
Okay.
Not once. Again and again and again. But then obviously he using a car to try to hit the family is a crime, but people trying to collect whether he say anything or not.
Right.
And if he didn't say it, is it a hate crime? And by the way, the chair of my panel is a lady by the name Deborah Halberstein. For her was her son. They have a bus full of Jewish kids. They were on going on the Brooklyn Bridge, and somebody take a gun and start shooting at them.
Jeez.
And FBI, it's not a hate crime.
Wow.
So this lady spent 17 years working on it until they reversed their finding. She is a great lady. I mean, she really go after it. She said, this is my son, he died of a hate crime. And so she's very, very
heartbreaking,
a big advocate of this. And when you come to speeches, not just a speech. I was told that if somebody draw a swastika or any sign of hate, and then if you can spray some water, it's gone. It's a free speech.
Right.
As free speech, it's protected in the United States, no matter what you say. But you know what? All the violence, all the crime, hate crime, they started by speech, started by words.
Right.
If we do not regulate some of these words by some of the people, we will continue to look at all the inciting of the violence in the whole United States. Forget about the rest of the world. It's all somebody starts saying something and then creating this. And then once this whole thing come out, you cannot stop it anymore. So that's really, we need to look at that. But the law is there. They're protected by hate speech. The hate speech are protected by as a First Amendment.
Yeah, that's an interesting, and that brings us to the really good debate, because, that is the eternal question when we're talking about free speech: is hate speech free speech? And I think I think for the United States, as we know, free speech, the First Amendment right, really is a pillar of the American values. But it also brings into question, maybe we need to relook at that, because I really like the insight that you just shared, Fred, is that all hate crimes eventually can kind of circle back to speech. It started with speech, and it starts off with these concepts and ideas that are being said. But again, I think that's a hard concept for many Americans, because unfortunately, everyone kind of reverts back to that First Amendment right. And and this is probably something that we can
discussion, but I just want to point out what happened. On January 6th, the mob didn't go on to the Capitol. It's because the president said, "Go there, I'll be with you." If he didn't say that, would the mob be rushing up to the Capitol Hill? That's another, debate for us to talk about. So
absolutely.
Again, so that's just an example.
And interesting enough, we can see the consequences of that free speech. Donald Trump then seemingly banned from every single social media platform, and continue to this day. Here we are. Here we are, almost 7 months later, and he's still banned from these. I believe Facebook's now come out and said that they're going to give him a 2-year ban. So there is a timeline for him to be able to get back onto the platform. Okay. So this is really interesting. So I want to just talk about that panel crime again. This is the hate crime review panel. Now, is there many different members? For example, this is not just specifically focusing on Asian hate crime. This is everybody together. For example, Muslim, Jewish, everybody. So how many people are on that panel?
Initially, right now there's 5 of us.
Okay.
Myself, I'm Asian. Deborah, she's Jewish. Okay. We have a Muslim representative, a gay and lesbian representative, and an African American. These are the 5 groups that's having the most in terms of, recorded hate crime in New York City. So they start with this first. I'm sure there's others, in the future. But to start anything, if you start small, it's easier to manage.
No,
I think so. That's where we are. Yeah.
That's fantastic. No, that's good to see that diversity in the 5 major groups that are experiencing some hate crime. So I like to see that, and I like to see this initiative done by the New York Police Department. I think it's really great to combat this. I'll share with you an interesting story. I'm here in Vancouver, Canada, and this is exactly where we are seeing a big issue right now. For example, we have a friend of ours who is a Chinese family. I think the mother and father, they're probably around their 50s, and their next door neighbor has been, unfortunately, really tormenting them and really verbally abusing them over the last year. And there's been many incidences, and they've basically confided in us and said, they have, been called China virus to their face. The neighbors have taken garbage cans, literally dumped trash over the fence, repeatedly, really targeting them and kind of tormenting them. And unfortunately, the Vancouver Police Department said, well, you have not been physically hurt. So essentially, there is free speech here, even though they are saying very nasty things to you. They're doing mean things to you, dumping trash into your backyard. It's not going to hurt anybody.
Well, it is not hurting anyone, but it is a violation of littering. I think that they should definitely install cameras to protect themselves. If they do, install night vision cameras all over the perimeters of the house, so that if there are things, happen to them, or any symbolism that is violent or hate, at least they can capture that.
Yeah, and that's the advice that we've given them, and the police did say that. They said if you can capture video evidence of that, we'll take that into consideration. But it's just interesting, and this is why it takes special task forces, and it's going to take something like you said, 25, 30 senior officers. They are going above and beyond their normal job to come out and form, this task force. So this is some great things happening in the city of New York. And
that's another thing. Now that you mentioned this, actually, I've been holding sessions, initially with the NYPD, and now because I'm going out the jurisdiction of the NYPD, we're doing independently. We're holding personal safety and self-defense demonstrations. It's a couple hours, not to be trying to help them so that they can fight off everybody, but more of teaching them how to run away from people, how to turn around when you go into an alley or so forth. How do you turn? A lot of them are former police officers, but they are karate instructors now.
Nice, excellent.
So we teach them about that, because the awakening of understanding you have to protect yourself and what to do to make yourself safe. It's something important. And after this happened, a lot of people in the Chinese community talk about getting guns, getting knives, bringing mace, bringing tasers.
Right.
Some of these things might be legal to get. Some of them are not. Some of them you need a license to possess, to buy these things.
Correct.
Others, even if you have a license to have these, the usage of it, whether it's legal or not, it's another question.
Correct.
Because you can have a kitchen knife about this long. If you use it in the kitchen, you're fine. You start walking around on the street holding a 9-inch knife, the police is going to be questioning you and maybe take your knife away.
Correct.
So what we started, a friend of mine, he started a program called Yellow Whistles.
Okay.
Basically, we have these whistles to give it out to the community. Eventually, it will be 2.5 million whistles giving out to all.
Wow.
Not just the Chinese. We give it out to all community.
Amazing.
And what happened is that if you're being attacked, blow the whistle.
Oh, that's a great idea.
If you see somebody being attacked, blow the whistle. So if one person getting attacked, 4 or 5 other people blow the whistle and pointing at that, that will bring the attention, and the attacker will think twice before they continue.
Fantastic.
But I also tell
great
people,
idea.
give it to the senior citizen. If they fell down, blow the whistle.
Absolutely.
And I give it to other friends. I say, give it to your kids. When you go skiing, bring it with you. If you get in the woods or something and you get hurt, blow the whistle. The whole point about a whistle is starting of anti-hate, anti-violence. But at the end, it's about helping people. And why yellow is because the color of yellow was using as a derogatory to describe Chinese. Because we are the yellow skin, yellow people. And they also associate the color of yellow to cowardness. But yellow is also a beautiful color of the sun and the moon and flowers. Absolutely. And so we're going to use this symbol of hate against it and fight against it. So we're going to have these yellow whistles. So that's another effort that I'm helping along. They're working out all of the United States right now.
Fantastic. Fred. I'm so happy that I was able to bring you into the studio today to talk about this and this whistle initiative that you said. I think it's an amazing thing. It's great to see, some changes being made and certainly to combat this. One final question for you, Fred, as we close out today's session. What is something else that we can do? General public, if you're listening to this, what can we do to support our Asian American brothers and sisters, as we strive for more equality and a better society in America?
I think if we can have more people speak out and speak out the truth and have an open mind rather than just blindly listen to whoever the voice that be, I think they will first find enlightening for themselves how great a world there is, how great both China and United States are, and they can be their own voice rather than just repeating what someone else have said. And I think that will be helping us a lot. Fantastic.
Well said. Well, Fred, I want to thank you so much for coming on Real Talk China and sharing, what you're doing within the Chinese and Asian community, and of course your local community there in New York City. Thank you for being the change in the world that you want to see. That's the one advice I always say. You want to make a difference, be the change you want to see in the world, and you're doing that in New York City. Thank you for your work, and thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right.